Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by World Chaos. Are you bored of waking up and your home still exists? Try World Chaos today. Episode 335, State Management Revisited. Oh, and we're still hiring.
Did you all watch or listen to the WWDC announcement?
Yes.
All of it? Or
I was like really paying attention for the first like maybe hour.
Okay.
And then I started tuning out in the second part.
Yeah.
But we I don't know if we've talked about this before, but Infinite Red almost always watches it.
Yeah, we usually have a kind
we all
jump in Zoom and
watch party.
We make fun of the presentations and
the cinematics. Was it Craig cinematics running around and stuff?
Yeah. At one point, that was just like so unusual and cool because a lot of times, like back in the day, you know, tech presentations were so dry, and they would really kind of make them an event, right? Apple would.
Well, yeah, that was like Steve Jobs' like thing when his like the iPhone event and the.
What, didn't Microsoft have like a dance party or something on the stage? You know what I'm talking
They really
about?
tried.
Yeah.
They really tried.
They're like, hey, look at us over here.
Yeah, it's like dancing like with their fingers kind of
But
thing.
like everyone remembers the classic Steve Jobs events where it's like black stage, like black backdrop. He had the black turtleneck.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like it highlighted like the tech. Like he would like hold up the iPhone and like show everybody.
And there was the one more thing.
There was always the one more thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We got to where it was like, there was no one more thing this year. Come on. Like we want
There's always
presents.
a one more thing.
We want to open a present. We want a gift of something new. But yeah, I don't know. I just can't get really very hyped about it these days.
They're very corporate feeling now.
It
doesn't have the same magic that it used to.
No. I actually went to a WWDC one time.
Oh, really?
2016. Yeah.
2016?
Yeah, nothing really big happened that year.
Because anybody can go, right? If you're registered as a developer?
Yes.
Is that the idea?
But it was, at least at that time, it was a lottery, and I got a ticket. And I actually stayed at Todd's house in like the Bay Area, and this was not too long after we had merged. I think it was probably June of 2016. So yeah, I don't remember exactly the timing, but something like that. It was a fun experience, but man, it was like 6,000 people, and I didn't know hardly anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I did end up I remember seeing, there's one guy that still, I think to this day, works at Apple that I knew. He was like a Rails dev back in the day, actually does Rails at Apple. So I knew him, and I got a chance to chat with him a bit.
What
he
is
was actually
Apple doing with Rails?
Oh, it was like documentation or something. It was like a bunch of docs. And then actually someone we've had on the podcast, Orda, was actually there as well. And I hung out with him just briefly because I knew him a little bit. So that was
that's a cool
many
experience.
years ago. Yeah.
And back then, there were no leaks. Like, you had an idea, like, oh, something new in this, like, the phone sphere is coming out. You could guess it was a new iPhone or whatever. But now, I feel like I read I don't know if you all do this, but Mac Rumors, I guess that's why it's called Mac Rumors. They pretty much nailed the presentation to a T. And I, like, read it the day before. And then, as I was watching it the whole time, I was like, yep, heard about that already. Next. So.
You know, I actually saw a lot of criticism, especially of their new kind of like glass, like
the
transparent
liquid glass.
thing.
Yeah, it's getting made fun of all over.
And I had like Google's announcements had way more positivity around them. There was a lot of like wonder around Google.
Hating on Apple is like people's pastime now.
That is
They
true.
do it
That
for
is
fun.
true. Yeah. Yeah. They've kind of, and in some ways they've kind of earned it.
If you're from Apple and you're listening to this, we appreciate that you
we have to
provide us with a platform that lets us have a job.
This is true. This is true.
But so the liquid glass thing, it's from a technological standpoint, super cool. like that they figured out how to do this, like from like design and like technology, like incredibly impressive. But it's one of those like just because you can, doesn't mean like it seems like they didn't really think through all the practical like
exactly. And I think I said it in the watch party. I was actually working on a accessibility ticket for my client while I was watching it, and then as I'm like doing the accessibility testing, I look at my simulator and I look at the screen and I'm like, there's no way that's accessible right now. Like someone who has, vision impaired, whatever it is, like it just doesn't make sense.
No contrast.
I think even someone who can see clearly 20/20 vision,
you
would still miss some of that text on the screen. It just seemed very like hidden in the background.
Very busy.
And some of the states aren't obvious, like whether a button's pushed or not and things like that. Yeah.
Obviously it's going to be in beta for a while. Like with user feedback, they may be able to tweak it. And
it'll turn into like murky liquid glass so that you can see it.
Liquid mud.
Jordan Walk tweeted that he thought that maybe Apple was just trying to introduce features that are hard to do on the web.
Yeah, that's it's a bit of a cynical take, but it wouldn't shock me. Our team was discussing though, like what liquid glass means from a React Native perspective, and sort of like speculating about how that'll be possible with React Native, and it's hard to say for now. But Evan Bacon already did it with Expo. It sounds like,
right?
At least he tweeted about it. So it'll probably be baked into React Native Core or baked into Expo or a third-party library or something. It'll be really interesting to hear how it
I believe someone from CallStack already tested the bottom tabs in Liquid Glass, and it automatically works. I think it's
just automatically works.
Bottom tabs, yeah. They updated. All they said was they updated Xcode to the latest beta, ran their React Native project, and it worked.
Well, it must be the UI views underneath.
Yeah. And that's
are automatically doing it.
That's the benefit of React Native. I mean, Flutter's going to have to emulate this if they want.
Yeah, that's what I saw that a lot on Twitter. It was that was like, oh, Flutter's probably really not happy because they like recreate all of the UI components in their own system, and now they're going to have to recreate this glass effect or just not use it. And
yeah.
Whereas React Native, it's like you're literally rendering UI views.
Yeah, like you get it for free.
Yeah, you do get it
more
for
or
free.
less. Yeah. All right. Well, I suppose we do have a real topic to talk about here.
This should have been we should have changed our topic.
Maybe we should have. Yeah, that's okay. Anyway, I'm Jamon. She's Robin. He's Mazen, and we are React Native Radio. And React Native Radio is brought to you by Infinite Red, which is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the U.S. We're a team of 30 senior plus React Native developers and support staff. We've been doing this for just about 10 years. We'll let you know when it has been 10 years, but we're getting there.
I feel like we've been saying just almost 10 years for maybe a little too long. But it's close. It's
as soon as
legitimately close now.
Yeah, as soon as it flips, I'll be like working on 20, right?
Yeah. It's been almost 10 years for almost 10 years.
Ah, yeah, there you go. I like it. We are in the year, though, that we did the merger and all that. So, yeah. If you're looking for React Native expertise, hit us up, infinite.red/radio. And don't forget to mention that you did hear about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, if you stuck with us through all of that WWDC talk and everything, we do have a topic today, and that is state management revisited. So we did a state management episode. I think it was it like our second episode or something?
It was our second episode after we took the podcast over. It was episode 175 in October of 2020. I forgot that we started the podcast during COVID, but it's been almost 5 years.
It was before my time. Does it count?
No,
I
it
don't
doesn't.
think it does. Yeah. We didn't get your take on it. So that's why we're doing it again.
That was before Mazen joined us.
But, things have changed a lot. And let's just talk really quickly about the background here of state management. In the early days, and I'm thinking, I think of everything sort of in the timeline of both React Native and Infinite Red, which is similar, obviously. Both started in 2015. State management was in flux.
Router flux?
It was flux? Both in flux and it was flux pattern. Yes, there was. Router flux is more of a navigation library. Yeah,
but it was like weird. It was like based on the flux pattern, but for navigation.
Yeah. And then Redux came onto the scene and we adopted it. We brought it in, especially into like Ignite and all of our projects and stuff. And then
we even created our own little like wrapper.
Yeah, Redux sauce.
Not wrapper. It was like a helper. It was called Redux sauce.
Yeah. It was sort of
like mitigate some of the boilerplate.
Sort of like directionally toward RTK a little bit. Like there was some cool stuff there. But a couple years later, we were looking for something else. All the boilerplate was just getting really annoying to deal with. And so we settled on Mobix State Tree, which kind of was our go-to for many, many years. If
you've listened to the podcast even a little bit, you probably know that we were Mobix State Tree fans for a really long time. It was in our Ignite stack. Mm-hmm. We used it pretty vocally and talked about how much we loved it and preferred it to Redux.
Yeah.
But the big but with that is we seem to be the only ones.
Yeah, there are other people using it, but it's a smaller community for sure. I was the primary maintainer for a while. Tyler Williams, who works for us, has been kind of maintaining it. We have a few other people on the core team that are doing a good job. And this is definitely not against MST, because even when I asked people not that long ago what they would prefer to start with, a lot of people still said MST at Infinite Red. So it's still like a pretty popular thing within Infinite Red, but we're a consultancy. We're not a product company that can sit here and make sort of super opinionated choices that are out of step with the broader community. And I think that's just kind of the reality. And especially with React compiler coming on the scene and suspense and things like that, we started looking at alternatives.
Do you want to explain, just for people who don't know, why React suspense coming down the line was going to impact our decision to keep using Mobix State Tree?
So suspense was more somewhat theoretical problems. There's a possibility that it could cause issues. I think the bigger issue was actually more React compiler, because React compiler does like static analysis of your code, your React code, and transpiles it into you're not going to have to do like use memo anymore. You're not going to have to do use callback. A lot of those things will go away, but it has to be able to read the code in a way that it really understands like how it's working. And Mobix State Tree has, at least from the component level, a little bit of magic happening where it's watching what properties are accessed and then re-rendering based on that Mobix React is.
And that's so observe function that you're talking about that you would wrap
observer around it. Exactly. And then Tyler came up with the use observer like selector basically, which gets around it, but then it starts making it feel a lot like the other ones. And so it's sort of like, well, you're kind of losing the magic. And so why not like take a look around and see what's going to go on. So spoiler alert, there is not a clear winner anymore. We are actually becoming less opinionated at Infinite Red. So let's talk about the alternatives first. And then we're going to talk about how we think about state management internally. And then lastly, we're going to kind of hopefully teach you from our perspective, or at least discuss from our perspective, how to make these decisions. Because the biggest question here is, how do you choose a state management library when you're starting a project? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about alternatives.
Well, the obvious one that I think everyone's probably going to know is Redux, which now includes Redux as well as RTK, which is Redux Toolkit. And then like kind of tangentially RTK Query, which is based off of TanStack Query, which is more integrated with data fetching. But the primary state management library is Redux with RTK.
Yeah.
And even before you go to a third-party package, again, we're only talking alternatives here. We're not going to put opinions within there just yet. But you could just go simple, use state, use context, use reducer, create your own hand-rolled one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just from what React provides. And I think that's a lot of times what the React team at Meta likes to kind of advocate for, is like start there. Mm-hmm. The survey, the React Native survey, which came out for 2024, actually shows that sort of that like the bare, both of those options, Redux and just sort of like the bare React state tools, as dropping in popularity a little bit. So there are some other alternatives kind of coming up. TanStack Query for sure has been rising in popularity. Tanner is coming out with a state management system of his own that's kind of attached to that or compatible with that. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And then Zustand has been really interesting. That's the one that has actually been gaining the most usage, I think.
It's like a steady incline.
Yeah, exactly. Very interesting. It's sort of like, sort of like how Redux was like, let's take the flux pattern and do it simpler. Zustand is sort of like, let's take the Redux pattern and do it even simpler. Mm-hmm. It's like continuing to kind of refine on that pattern.
You then have a new one on the scene, Legend State from Jay Meistrick. Mm-hmm. We've had him on the podcast talk about Legend List. So that one's brand new. Another one on here is X State. Survey said it wasn't very popular, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more later.
There's one called Jotai, which is moderately popular, not really going up or down according to the survey. But I know there's some people that use it. And then, of course, MobX and MobX State Tree, which we've used a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then there's some more unconventional ones that we see used occasionally. Firebase and Firestore, which is kind of a serverless solution, but it also provides a client-side state storage. There's Watermelon DB, Realm, Apollo, which is a GraphQL client, Altio, Stan.js. These are like...
Some of these I'd never heard of. It's like very random ones. I don't know. I feel like one-off. They're used one-off? It's
when you see a project using it, you recognize the name, but it seems unusual.
Yeah.
And then Recoil, which came out of Facebook, that again is dropping in popularity, even though it never really got that popular. I think that the Meta team, I think they use it internally, or they have used it internally, but they never really pushed it all that hard. And that was an interesting one. And then one that I added to our list, Convex. So Convex is a very interesting one. I know that Theo really likes this library. He's building his T3 chat on it. And I'm looking into it because I think there's some interesting things there. So anyway, if we missed one that you're using that you're thinking like, wow, you really should have mentioned this, please let us know. But that was sort of like pulling from the survey results and internal conversations as well. Speaking of which, let's talk about how we currently are using state management, because I think that is also important here. Like, what are we seeing out in the wild? So we pulled a sample of 8 projects that we've been working on, either currently or recently. We're not going to, say what apps they are. We're not allowed to. But these are actual, results from various people. I'll just run through it really quick. First project uses Zustand, UState. Everybody uses UState. So, you're going to use UState.
Right, but for some things.
Yeah. React Query, some context. And this is actually, I think, Mazen, this is your project, right?
Correct, yeah. This is the one I'm on. And I think, I can kind of give a little bit of a story around why we chose that stack. I can say, the context is mainly coming from third-party libraries, or if we created our own context for things like push notifications, I think is the latest one, which, funny enough, I bring that up. I actually just stripped that out today. So there goes one context. But yes, UState, I guess you could say no one really uses UState in their top app level, right? Because then it re-renders the entire app. That's not performant. That's not cool.
Right.
So we use it in a simple you need a Boolean to show a modal, for example.
Yeah.
Simplicity. I think there's tons of really, really great use cases for use context, and definitely for use state. I wouldn't be surprised if almost every screen has something that they're using use state for.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's a difference between using it for a specific purpose and using it for your entire application state.
It's funny you say using it for a specific purpose, because that then leads me to when we started the project, the client goes, what are we going to use for our state management tool? My first response, no matter who I'm, kind of talking to when it comes to architecture decisions, it's, do you need a state management tool? I don't know if I've said this on the podcast before,
right?
But I usually tend to lean towards we don't need a state management tool until we really are put in a corner. then and then we need to use it.
Right. Your first question should be, do we need a state management library, not which state management library?
Correct. And then, and that's when I was like, well, we need data fetching, right? Our app needs data fetching of some sort. So let's lean to React Query, because it seems like everyone is using React Query these days. And I love how easy it is to use. The documentation is great. Let's use React Query. Then, as things evolved, we did find out that, okay, yes, we do need a state that is held for a specific, life cycle of the app for the user. So we do need to implement something. And then at that point, I kind of looked out, and I'll get into other of my likes or dislikes in state management tools later, but then we landed on Zustand, and I kind of showed it, and I was like, look, it's easy to use, and here are the other reasons why. And that's kind of how we landed on that stack. So do you need a state management tool? Should be the first question.
And the other part of that is like, I've seen people push that too far also, where they're like rebuilding Redux in using it like use reducer. And at that point, it's like, okay, just go find a state management. Our second project is using MobX State Tree and UState. And that's kind of interesting because like MobX State Tree, often when we're using it, you don't have a long list of other things because it comes with so much built in. Like it's just ready to go. So you just use MobX State Tree. And so that's kind of cool. And one of the reasons we like it. The third project, also MST and UState. That's it. Just those two things. Project 4, pretty big project. A whole bunch of people working on it. This is using Redux Toolkit, RTK, and RTK Query. It uses some UState in some context. And I think that one, the decision to go with that was because they were already using Redux on their web side of things. And so they were already familiar with it, or at least the web developers were. Project 5, I think, it came to us with the state management already set, and that was Redux. And so that's using Redux and UState. Project 6 is actually using MobX and Apollo Client. Again, they came to us with the state management already set. It is a little bit of an awkward fit, but this is a very large app. And so there's historical reasons why it is the way it is.
If you're not familiar with MobX at all, the difference between MobX and MobX State Tree is that MobX kind of provides the observability, which is kind of the fundamental feature of it, that your views update when the state changes by being observers. And then the State Tree portion just adds a lot of like type safety and
structure.
Yeah. Whereas MobX is very unstructured, but it provides the observability component. So
exactly,
you can use MobX by itself. It just doesn't put any rigor on what your state looks like.
Seventh project actually uses XState and UState. So that one's been kind of interesting to work on. We haven't done too many XState projects, so that's good. That's good experience for us. Project 8, the last one, is actually using Watermelon DB. And so that one has also been interesting for us to kind of go through that. And that one came to us again with that already, that decision already made.
Usually I feel like apps lean to something like Watermelon DB when it's offline heavy. That's usually been the context.
Right. It provides support for like syncing versions of the database if you need to like reconcile.
But then, of course, I say that out loud now, and someone will be like, well, did you know React Query can be used as a state management tool, and it can do all this?
Just by the number of options that we just talked about, it's clear that like there's no silver bullet for this, and that everything is so dependent on your project's needs and your personal preferences as a developer, your organization's needs. So there's not like a wrong answer. You're not going to be picking something that like completely goes against the grain, because there's always going to be someone out there using what you pick.
Yeah.
Because the landscape is pretty varied.
That's true.
That's very true, Robin, because looking at this list real quick, 4 of the apps are pretty much the same-esque apps, and each one is using a different stack.
And probably could have used, like, any one of these apps probably could have used one of the other state management libraries successfully. It's very hard to like make a super, super wrong choice. you may get into it and not like the feel of something. But it's never going to be like impossible to do what you need to do.
Unless you choose Redux, right? Then, yeah.
Redux is probably the safest choice, to be honest. But
I wouldn't be surprised if the project that you mentioned that uses Redux was initialized a longer, like much earlier than the other ones that we recently discussed, right? That's a trend that I've seen. If any app is using Redux specifically, it was initialized, much earlier in the life of React Native than it would have been if it was initialized, say, 2 years ago.
Yeah. So what makes us like or dislike a particular state management solution? Let's just kind of like go through a few things. For me, I don't like, and this is a little bit it sounds counter to what Mazen was saying. It is actually not, and I'll explain why. I don't like use state scattered everywhere, because that means your state is actually not in a, like, try to gather up that state and persist it. Try to like restore that state at some point. It's actually really hard. It's really hard to do.
I'm a firm believer that use state should be as local as possible.
Local as possible, and also like more like something that doesn't need to be persisted.
It's temporal. Something that you can throw away when the screen unmounts.
Exactly.
Can I give a perfect example of this?
Sure.
We had a screen that showed a toast. We used use state to show that toast, and it went away. Ticket number 2 comes in. Let's add another toast to this other screen. We add the toast using use state. Cool. Now we have the same code duplicated twice on 2 different screens. What we did, elevated that toast higher up, put the state in Zustand, and and then basically you call your Zustand store to create a toast.
Yep.
And that create toast function set a timeout for clearing the toast, did everything that needed to be handled in clearing that toast, and then that toast component then interacted with Zustand to know when the user tapped it to dismiss it, and all that kind of stuff. And, and you would pass in, let's say, the text, like what text should show on there, sort of thing. So that's, if you notice you're doing the same use state to do the same function more than once, that's probably a good, point to elevate it even higher.
And that kind of brings in a point that a lot of times this isn't just state management, but it's also like eventing and it's communication between different levels. State management sort of becomes that orchestration layer on top of it, which is very interesting. Another thing I don't like is when there's a lack of documentation or the documentation is wrong. That's a fairly common one. Lack of third-party integrations. So like, hey, we have real world needs. What if we need to connect in with GraphQL? What if we need to connect to a Firebase backend? What if we need to, like have, again, like persistence, or some sort of offline sync, or maybe other third-party integrations. So having lots of third-party integrations is important. I don't like boilerplate code. I just want it to get out of my way. I want it to be like very concise. I actually, probably more than a lot of developers, will do a lot to try to get that stuff hidden in the background. Back in the day when I did iOS development, I actually built a library that abstracted away a lot of the boilerplate for navigation in iOS, because a lot of times you'd write like 5 lines of code just to present a modal or something like that, or to create a navigation stack. And I turned that into like a much smaller, like 1 or 2 lines of code, very, very tiny. And I think also like, what we already know, like for me, like what I already know does factor in to my initial reaction to a state management library. And I don't think that's a unique thing. What about you, Robin? Are you like, what makes you enjoy, or not like a particular state management system?
So I really enjoy state management libraries that have a really strong connection to like your mental model or like your data model, which is honestly one of the reasons I really liked MSTs, because it was very like object oriented, and it really fit my model of like, okay, I have a collection of users, I have a collection of like whatever, and like because like my background, right, was originally Rails, and like I absolutely loved like database design and like figuring out like what your records were going to be, and like what tables you needed of those records, and like how things tied together. And so I really loved things that felt object oriented like that. And there's like with Redux and stuff, I always had much more trouble like piecing together the flow of data and how things fit together. And it just was an extra level of just like friction. So that's always what I preferred. But like there's obviously other considerations like developer experience, like how much boilerplate there is, how performant things are is a huge consideration. You want things to be like efficient and fast at retrieving data and getting it back and forth to the UI whenever you render.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think for me, we've all kind of touched on the same points. Pretty much, making sure it's not boilerplate-y. That's something I, very strongly opinionated on. And I think the one other thing that I'll say, and I think I kind of mentioned it at the beginning, it's if you had one tool to rule them all, I would love that, which includes a data caching layer like React Query. So if React Query had a state management tool, which I think Tanner is working on, part of his 10 stack, to do a tool like that, I think that would be something nice, right? You mentioned documentation. I agree. And the big one that I will also add and elaborate on what you said, Jamon, is as a consultant, for me, when I'm choosing a state management tool, it's what is my client familiar with? Because, with my comfort, my ability to use it, the client's needs kind of supersede that, right? So I need to kind of learn, get up to speed on it, and making sure that if they have web devs, what are the web devs familiar with mainly? So we can kind of work together to use a state management tool that kind of works for it. Which leads me to, why we decided our stack within my project. It's because we knew web was going to be a project towards the end, one repo for all three platforms. So I was like, are you all familiar? Have you used Assistant in the past? And the answer was yes. I was like, okay, we should, weight this one more heavily than something else that I'm more familiar with, for example.
In a lot of ways, like our approach has changed in that regard just because our clients have changed.
Yeah.
We used to do a lot of startups where like they didn't have any development team at all. And so like we would come in and we were completely responsible for building the app. Like they weren't going to take it over from us. Like it was just us. And so we could kind of make a lot of these architecture and like stack decisions completely on what we preferred and what we were comfortable with. And in the last 4 or 5 years, our clients have gotten bigger and they have their own teams. They have their own like existing like technology preferences. And they're a lot more sure of what they want. And so then it becomes our job to integrate with that, which we're happy to do. It just means that we don't have as unified of a as standard of a stack between our projects, which is fine. And it means we get to learn and know a lot more different tools.
Yeah. And I think really that leads us into our last thing here, which is really you should form your own opinion. And there are some individual needs that will happen here no matter what. I like to use AI to help me decide. I just sort of like put in my preferences and then ask it which one sort of matches those needs the best. Not just preferences, but also like constraints and what people know and things like that.
Like my app needs offline support, data caching, and data input, data caching. And I, as a developer, really like things that have a lot of boilerplate and good documentation. What's a library I should use?
Yeah.
My list would be, is it performant? Is it easy to debug? Like, are there good debug tools?
That's a huge one.
Elegant API. I don't like boilerplate. Seamless offline persistence, because every app really should pick up where you left off. It shouldn't like reset to the beginning if it happens to get killed. There's some apps where I know that no matter when I open it, it's going to be right at the last page. The Athletic is a good one where it doesn't matter if it's been months and months and months. I open that app and it'll be at the article I was last reading, which is awesome. And it keeps like the whole back stack of all the previous articles that I had opened. So it's really cool. Great documentation, of course, great third-party integrations, server-side APIs, like a variety of those, like GraphQL, whatever, because we don't control the back end. So for me, that's important. Maybe you can get away with something where like you have to use one specific backend, and that's fine. But this is just sort of from my perspective. Having a positive and helpful community is big. I think there are some communities that aren't that, and I don't want to be,
because you're gonna get stuck at some point.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally.
And having a place to turn to that's separate from the documentation, because likely if you're stuck, you've been reading the documentation and you're still stuck, and you need someone with experience to read your problem and help give experienced advice. So it's always nice when they're nice about it.
And that starts with the maintainers. And so that's my last thing is active maintainers who really care.
Mm-hmm. It's a good list.
Do you have a list, Robin?
I don't have a list, but I would say I'm a person who learns by doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're trying to decide what state management library you prefer or is right for your project, just try it. Try it in a side project or even try it in your actual project for a while. And see how it goes, because really the only way you're going to get a feel for, is this working for me, is to use it. That's why I always like to have a side project or two just going all the time, so I can kind of use it as a playground or a test bed for this kind of thing, because I really have to get my hands on it to see.
And Mazen, what do you have?
Cool. Yeah, mine was, do you need it? I feel like I say that. I asked that question a lot. So it was yeah, you need this one on top of your list. Performance and usability. So to me, that sounds like, elegant API, a clean API to use. And it was documentation and community support. Because again, all our packages are open source. So we need that community support.
So if you had to decide right now and you couldn't say it depends, and you were building an app for yourself, Mazen, what would you use for state management?
I'd use Zustand.
Okay. You'd use Zustand. Got it.
Along with React Query for my data layer. Yeah.
All right. Robin.
I would use React Query.
React Query. Okay.
And if I needed more beyond that, I would probably try Zustand, because I haven't actually used it.
Mm-hmm.
But based on what I've heard, it seems to be pretty good. And pretty, a lot of people are happy with it. So that's probably what I would try.
Yep.
I'm going to leave it there, because there's a million, there's a million it depends yes. qualifiers.
I think for me, I would do Legend State and use the sync system that Jay built. Mostly because Jay's a good friend, and anytime I report a bug, he fixes it.
It's nice awesome. when the person responsible for the bugs is a close friend, and you can just ping him.
I love Legend State. It's great. I have used it on a couple of side projects and stuff. But so that's that. Robin, do you have a mom joke to take us out of this episode?
All right, I've got one. This is Jamon's joke, but I'm going to tell it because that's how this works. I met a microbiologist once. They were a lot bigger than I expected.
Didn't see that coming.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamon Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.